The tale unfolds at Valdir Academy during a graduation ceremony held in the majestic main building beneath a clear sky. Among the graduates was a remarkable student named Michael Foxon, who stepped forward to receive his diploma. Gracing the podium, Michael addressed the audience, introducing himself as a proud second-year graduate of the academy. Meanwhile, a young man lounged on a tree branch, watching Michael with a mocking grin. He recalled how Michael used to fumble even the simplest greetings and observed him from a distance, likening his distinctive white hair to a fluffy ball of cotton. As Michael continued his speech, he expressed heartfelt gratitude for the 3 years spent at the academy, considering them the most significant of his life. The young man smiled mysteriously, reflecting on the countless events that had transpired during that time. He had struggled to play the role of the side character next to the main protagonist, but with his main mission now peacefully accomplished, he felt ready to embrace a comfortable, ordinary life. However, he was taken aback when Michael mentioned his name, acknowledging that he would not have reached this moment without his mentor, Chris. This revelation left Chris bewildered. Michael looked skyward, continuing his speech with thanks for Chris's unwavering support, even during his weakest moments. Chris's astonishment grew as Michael expressed a desire to repay his mentor by staying by his side for life, a declaration that surprised Chris deeply. The atmosphere shifted as objections arose from the crowd. Chris suddenly realized that many explorers had been vying for Michael's exceptional talents. Then, several of Michael's peers, also former students of Chris, stood up to pledge their support, declaring their intention to join him. Another group of students followed suit, announcing their shared goal of supporting their former teacher, Chris Dutton. In total, 5 of Chris's former students devoted their loyalty to him, leaving him in shock and struggling to grasp the unfolding events. Overwhelmed, Chris questioned how he had found himself in such an extraordinary situation. A wave of panic and dread engulfed Chris as he internally screamed that he was merely a forgotten side character, questioning whether he had ruined his role. Memories flooded back to a horrific car accident from his previous life. Lying on the ground, soaked in blood, he recalled a strange message appearing before his fading consciousness, a main mission titled A New Life. It asked if he wished to accept the mission, leaving him terrified that he was on the brink of death. But then the word live emerged, pushing him toward decision. With a fierce desire to survive, Chris resolved to embrace a new life, rejecting the idea of dying at that moment. He pressed the accept button, marking the start of his new journey. Suddenly, Chris awoke in a different place, greeted by a woman in formal attire who announced that he had finally woken up. She couldn't see the message window he had experienced, and he was stunned when she called him Chris Dutton. She handed him an ID card bearing his new name, signaling the official beginning of his new life. Surprised by his ability to read the card in a language other than Japanese, Chris learned that it was supposed to be his first day at Valdir Academy. He had missed a welcoming ceremony due to a train accident, but the academy would understand his absence. Panic seized him again as he requested a mirror to confirm his new appearance. In that moment, another message appeared, stating he had been reincarnated as a teacher at Valdir Academy as part of a main mission. The message outlined that he had 3 years to complete certain tasks under the name Chris Dutton. Chris recalled that Valdir Academy was the setting of a fantasy novel he had once read for pleasure, about a weak protagonist who gained immense magical powers and dominated the world. He scoffed at the absurdity of his current situation, feeling both bewildered and intrigued. However, he had forgotten many details of the story and couldn't recall exactly who Chris Dutton was. Suddenly, a new message window appeared, informing him that a teacher must have students and that he had only 24 hours to reach the main gate of Valdir Academy, or he would face death as a penalty. This threat filled him with terror, and he began to scream, overwhelmed by the realization that he might die again if he failed. The staff member beside him thought he had gone mad. After leaving the clinic where he had awakened, Chris admitted he still felt pain. As he walked through the city, he lamented his dire financial situation, having lost half his savings at the clinic. He recalled the moment the nurse demanded an exorbitant sum for his treatment. It dawned on him that the currency here was gold and that the academy was a half-day's walk away, but he remained confused about Chris's true identity. Despite this, he felt a strong urge to open a personal status window, like in the video games he was familiar with. When the window appeared, it displayed his new stats, which were both amusing and disheartening. He was labeled as a reclusive mage with decent power, but the agility of a snail and defense as weak as paper. The real shock came when a message popped up stating that he was an illegal player and could not use any magical skills. He quickly realized that those stats were meaningless if he couldn't actually use magic. Sarcastically, he began shouting at himself, wondering if he had been reincarnated into a pirated version of the world, attracting the attention of passers-by. Things worsened when he realized that only monsters in this world were unable to use magic, and he was struck with fear at the thought of being a teacher at the continent's most prestigious academy. This was no longer just a problem. It felt like a death sentence. He worried about being accused of being a monster and executed for his inability to use magic, imagining his last words as a desperate defense before an angry crowd. The countdown window reminded him of the time left, only intensifying his anxiety. In a moment of despair, he decided there was no time for breakdowns and chose to focus on the second chance he had been given in this new life. He reassured himself that he had some luck. He was described as a reclusive mage and had experience playing similar roles. Regaining confidence, he recalled how he had once been praised for his performance in an online role-playing game. Chris decided that over the next 3 years, he would survive by pretending to be a mysterious and powerful mage, concealing his true strength. Upon arriving at the academy building, he found a stone statue lamenting that the welcoming ceremony had ended a week ago and that no one remained. As the statue sensed someone approaching, it became curious about this individual. It felt an overwhelming awe from the immense magical power radiating from Chris, and recalled that a new teacher had been in a train accident on the way to the academy. However, it sensed something extraordinary about him. A clear scar on Chris's forehead hinted at a dark, dangerous past. Soon, it became apparent that the person was Chris Dutton, with jet black hair resembling a wild beast's mane, pale skin like moonlight, and eyes as deep as midnight. The aura surrounding him was so intense that the statue considered him the embodiment of death in human form. Chris's black and red eyes reflected the emptiness he carried and the many endings he had witnessed. Stopping in front of the statue, Chris addressed it disdainfully, stating that its presence at the academy's gate was an insult. The statue demanded to know his name and purpose for being there. Chris confidently declared that he was the new teacher, Chris Dutton, and ordered the statue to open the gate immediately. Once he passed through the gate, Chris moved out of sight and collapsed from exhaustion and pain due to his injuries, acknowledging how difficult his situation truly was. Despite this, he felt relieved to have arrived on time and avoided imminent death. As he embraced his role, Chris began to feel that the character he was playing was somewhat cool. He decided to name his persona the overpowered teacher with zero motivation, a man who appeared lazy but was actually a seasoned and powerful warrior capable of offering sharp, inspiring advice to the story's main hero. Chris recalled that this character's backstory involved losing someone dear due to a personal mistake, leading to a complete breakdown until the academy headmaster intervened and saved him. He realized the most crucial aspect of this character was his trauma and reluctance to accept new students. Chris contemplated how this teacher would interact with potential students, pretending to be arrogant and claiming they were too weak to deserve his guidance. Chris thought the idea made sense and chose to tell the students that if they wanted to see his magic, they'd need to become stronger first. Suddenly, he saw blood on his hand, which shocked him. He felt lightheaded and in severe pain, realizing that the injury from the accident had reopened. At the same time, a message appeared stating that he received the academy map as a reward, which made him angry because he had hoped for something to heal him, not a map. Chris felt powerless, unable to reach the infirmary in his current condition. Just then, a student came up to him, looking worried and asking if he was okay. The student noticed Chris was bleeding from the forehead and became more concerned, while Chris noticed a strange mark on the student's cheek. He realized this was Michael Foxon, the original main character of the novel, who carried a cursed power. Chris could tell Michael hadn't awakened his powers yet. His hair was still brown, and he didn't look strong at all, just a confused and anxious student. So Chris went on with his plan, acting like the cold teacher who didn't care about his students. He harshly questioned Michael about why he was outside the classroom, during class hours. Michael became visibly anxious and tried to explain that he couldn't keep up and that his former teacher had banned him from returning to the training grounds. Chris looked closely at Michael, understanding why he was considered weak by his peers. Right now, Michael could only cast a basic fireball. Still, Chris was annoyed by how Michael's former teacher had treated him, feeling there was no excuse for it. Chris was caught off guard when Michael suddenly apologized and looked like he might cry, even though Chris hadn't aimed his words at him in particular. Feeling uncomfortable, Chris asked him with irritation which class he was from, since he needed to get him back quickly before anything worse happened. At that moment, a new mission window popped up in front of Chris, telling him he had less than 10 minutes to reach the classroom and start his first lesson as a new homeroom teacher of Class X, or else he would die. Even though he had the map, Chris still wasn't sure which way to go, but he figured this must be Class X based on what was going on. Meanwhile, Michael nervously explained that he was from Class 10, so Chris told him to show the way. Michael hesitated and begged for mercy, but Chris barked at him in a threatening voice to move right away. Michael responded in a scared, confused tone that he understood. Chris finally got to Class X, completely drained after carrying Michael the entire way, barely able to hide his pain. Michael, too worn out, collapsed to the ground as soon as they arrived, crying out from exhaustion. His classmates laughed at him for his dramatic entrance and told him to sit down without making more of a scene. When Chris entered, the students stared at him in confusion and surprise because of how strange he looked. Chris stood in front of them with a look of scorn and disgust, calling them all trash and harshly blaming the headmaster Valdir for the poor quality of students he was expected to teach. The students started murmuring among themselves in confusion, wondering who this man was and why he looked so disturbing with a clear wound on his head. A student named Nika Toot raised his hand with confidence and asked Chris who he was, and if he was even supposed to be here, as now was the highest-ranking student in the class. Chris responded with a calm and steady tone that his name was Chris Dutton. Na instantly remembered that he was the new teacher who had been involved in an accident that had both delayed and injured him. Without warning, Chris told Na to be quiet, his voice cold and cutting. Inside, Chris felt embarrassed by how poorly timed his entrance had been and silently hoped it would be ignored. He then remembered he needed to begin the lesson to meet the mission objective, but he felt disheartened because he didn't have the usual knowledge that reincarnated characters typically possess. Grabbing a piece of chalk, he told himself he had no choice but to get started. Chris stepped forward with determination, preparing to do something unorthodox. He wrote self-study on the board with intensity and purpose, resolving internally to follow through with his plan no matter what happened. The students were left speechless, stunned that the first lesson was simply a self-study period, and they began to question whether this was actually real. Despite feeling incredibly awkward inside about how strange his decision was, Chris pushed forward with confidence, maintaining the persona he had chosen. Out of nowhere, Chris made an odd move. He pretended to fall asleep, acting like the students weren't even worth speaking to, leaving them completely shocked and confused. Chris smirked to himself, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction with the performance, even sarcastically wondering if what he just did could be called a real lesson. But suddenly, a furious voice interrupted, scolding him loudly and demanding he stop this nonsense immediately. The voice sent a wave of anxiety and fear through Chris as he tried to figure out who it belonged to. A girl named Angelina Sharif, a possible heroine figure, stood up and shouted at him angrily for not attending the opening ceremony and for tarnishing Valdir Academy's reputation. Chris instantly realized who she was, known as the Ice Princess. On the surface, Angelina appeared dignified, the daughter of a duke, and she declared openly that she completely disapproved of what was happening in the classroom. Meanwhile, the rest of the students were becoming increasingly upset and confused by Chris's disrespectful behavior, especially since many of them came from noble backgrounds. Even though Chris knew his actions might create trouble later on, he continued pretending to be strict and emotionless, despite being aware of Angelina's tragic past. He felt this wasn't the time to show sympathy. Chris told Angelina coldly that if she didn't want to be in his class, she was free to leave, leaving her completely taken aback. He repeated it more bluntly, saying she should just go if she wasn't satisfied, though inside he wished he could apologize. Angelina, stunned, asked him what he had just said. Chris repeated himself with clear anger, warning her that he wouldn't say it again and telling her to leave if she didn't like his class. As the student silently sympathized with her, Angelina snapped back that she didn't want to learn anything from someone like him. She added that he wouldn't be able to handle the lessons anyway, and said she wouldn't waste her time on a useless teacher. Then she stormed out of the classroom, leaving behind a room filled with whispers of surprise and anxiety. At that moment, Chris thought to himself that he had expected this. All the students were proud nobles, and he began to wonder how many would stay in the end. He worried that his actions might get him fired, and his only hope was that the academy headmaster would back him. Suddenly, a message appeared in front of Chris, telling him the mission had been completed and awarding him the academy map and a monkey medal. This gave him a bit of relief. Looking around the classroom, he saw that only about half the students remained, the main characters, including the protagonist and the top-ranking students. Chris started to recognize who was still there, including potential heroine candidates gathered around Michael, like Dooley with her red hair and Belle with her healing abilities. He chose to postpone introducing another character who wasn't present yet, and instead got ready to act like a real teacher and give a meaningful piece of advice. Chris firmly told the class that learning magic half-heartedly would only lead to death. He said that Valdir Academy was really just a training ground for killers. The students were shocked and frightened by how suddenly and directly he said this. Chris went on to warn them of the dangers of using deadly weapons without having real control over their magic, stressing that the so-called accidents were really just a mask for something far more sinister. Then, with a serious look, he asked the students if they were truly ready to carry that kind of burden. The classroom fell into complete silence after Chris's shocking words, the tension spreading like a wave. Chris turned and walked out, satisfied that his strategy to leave a strong impression had succeeded. Inside the room, Michael remained quiet, clearly troubled and deep in thought about everything he had just heard. Outside the building, Chris laughed loudly, overwhelmed with relief after enduring such a high-pressure situation. He felt like the stress of maintaining his role had shaved 10 years off his life. Knowing that his survival in this world now depended entirely on his performance, he resolved to adapt quickly to this new reality. Suddenly, he remembered the keychain he had received as a reward and curiously wondered what kind of effect it might have. When he pulled it out and saw its monkey shape, he was genuinely impressed. It looked amazing, and he found himself liking it far more than expected. Still, he hesitated to wear it, worried it might clash with the serious persona he had carefully crafted. Then, a mysterious system message appeared, asking him to confirm whether he wanted to equip the keychain, along with a warning that it couldn't be removed for 5 minutes after activation. After a moment of hesitation, Chris decided to go for it and test its effect. Once he put on, a new window popped up, informing him that his agility stat had increased by 1 grade. From F to E, overjoyed, Chris called it a total cheat item and decided to hide it under his clothes so it wouldn't ruin his image. He was pleased to have gained an edge, especially one that could help him dodge better in combat. However, another unexpected message appeared right after. It detailed a strange side effect. Every sentence he spoke would now end with the word Kai. Chris was stunned and confused by this bizarre drawback. He panicked, shouting in frustration and disbelief, wondering if the game was mocking him. Was it suggesting he was a monkey? He adamantly declared that his character would never speak like that. At that exact moment, Angelina appeared behind him, catching him mid-outburst. She looked surprised and cautiously asked if he was Professor Chris. Regaining his composure, Chris turned to her calmly and asked why she was there. Angelina instantly regretted not casting a concealment spell. Now caught red-handed while smoking a cigarette, she froze under Chris's sharp, piercing gaze. She knew there would be no room for excuses. His look made that clear. Not even her noble status as a Sherry would protect her from judgment this time. Chris immediately recalled the kind of character Angelina represented. An arrogant genius who placed full trust in her own power and dismissed everyone else. On her side, Angelina found Chris's condescending gaze deeply unsettling. It stirred painful memories from her past, and quietly began to wear down her emotional defenses. Chris suddenly went silent and started walking toward her slowly, which made her extremely nervous, thinking he might search her or stop her from getting away. Feeling the pressure, Angelina quickly confessed that she had been smoking and said she would accept any punishment he decided for her. She thought it was better that Chris was the one who caught her, since he wouldn't let her off the hook even if it damaged her reputation. Deep down, she wished he would decide she wasn't fit to handle responsibility, so she could finally be rejected and freed from everything weighing on her. But Chris surprised her. He gently touched her forehead and called her a pitiful little girl, the word Kai still coming out at the end because of the keychain's effect. Angelina was completely confused by what he said and asked in disbelief what he meant by that. At that moment, Chris felt a deep sense of empathy toward her, recognizing someone else who was hiding their pain by acting out. He remembered himself holding someone in grief and regret, reminding himself that no matter how strong he became, he could never change the past or erase the guilt he carried. Angelina was really moved by how humanly Chris treated her. It stirred something in her that felt different from anything else. Then she noticed a monkey keychain and figured deep down he must be totally different from how he looked on the outside. She assumed someone special must have given it to him. In her heart, she quietly apologized to Chris for bringing up past pain and for acting out like a reckless child. Meanwhile, Chris was confused and wondering if she had noticed the weird way he was talking because of the keychain. In the end, Angelina went back to class, which confused her classmate Belle. Angelina just vaguely said she had been thinking about some things related to Professor Chris, not saying more. Class started with Nicotootie feeling excited that Class X now had only 5 students. Himself, Michael, Dulce, Belle, and Angelina. He called them a brilliant elite unit. At that moment, Dulce sarcastically told Chris that the other students had asked to transfer out, and she wanted to prove their strength to the people she called useless nobodies. She was also playfully teasing Michael, which made him a little embarrassed. Something Chris noticed and mentally joked about, calling Dulce the little devil type of heroine. Belle then stepped in to scold Dooley and told Michael to focus on a lesson, before turning to Chris and asking what they were going to do in class today. Chris hesitated for a moment but realized he had no other option. This time he had to actually teach them something real. He then seriously announced that today's class would be a field training exercise. Just then, a message from the game system appeared in front of Chris, telling him that the mission was for Class X to go to the Vanette's plains and defeat 50 monsters within 24 hours. The scene instantly changed to the beautiful natural setting of the Vanette's plains. All of a sudden, a huge magic circle appeared, shocking everyone, and signaled the start of the teleportation. The students were amazed when they were magically transported to the area and couldn't hide how impressed they were by the incredible technique Chris had supposedly used. Na excitedly praised Chris for using spatial magic, even though they hadn't gotten their training weapons yet. But in reality, Chris had nothing to do with the teleportation, and he started feeling confused. Just a few moments ago, they had been sitting in the classroom. Now, they were standing out in the open plains. Dooley noticed something strange and pointed out a mysterious shadow above Professor Chris's head, asking how such high-level magic had happened when none of the students were capable of it. Chris immediately realized they'd been summoned by some unknown force, and a wave of danger came over him as he understood what was going on. Suddenly, a terrifying giant monster appeared, a horned rabbit, and a message popped up confirming that an unidentified third party had been responsible for the teleportation. Dooley and Angelina both screamed, warning Chris about the huge beast that had appeared right behind him. Chris was terrified and started wondering if this was how he was going to die, especially with 50 monsters still left to deal with. He stared at the massive creatures coming toward him menacingly, but quickly got a grip on himself and reminded himself that he was Chris Dutton now, the strong character. He asked himself what the real Chris would do in a moment like this. He realized Chris Dutton would treat it as nothing more than a training opportunity for his students, a perfect chance to test them. Suddenly, Chris shouted at the students, asking if they had forgotten why they were there, trying to fire them up to fight. Angelina protested, saying it was insane to train in a place this dangerous, but Na quickly understood what Chris was getting at. Na excitedly explained that of course Professor Chris would be the one to take on the big monster, and the students just had to deal with the smaller ones. Chris felt a wave of relief when Na perfectly understood his intentions. Meanwhile, Angelina was irritated that her role was reduced to just handling the weaker monsters. Still, she chose to put her trust in Chris, convincing herself that he must have a solid reason and wouldn't endanger them without cause. She began preparing a powerful offensive spell and, believing in his plan, cast her ice spear spell with full strength as she bravely charged at the smaller monsters. Belle enthusiastically announced that she would take on a support role and start healing anyone who got injured. Michael also started gathering magical energy, determined to succeed at least once during this mission. In the end, the students successfully defeated all 50 monsters, and Chris praised them sincerely for their incredible performance, stating that such a result was expected from main characters and their close companions. But as he turned to face the towering monster in front of him, Chris's expression stiffened and a nervous smile formed. The huge rabbit monster stared him down with a frightening, ravenous glare, and Chris felt utterly powerless and terrified. He wished he could just faint before having to feel any pain, suddenly remembering the monster was still there. But he quickly pulled himself together and reminded himself that giving up wasn't an option. If he failed this mission, he would die for sure. He decided he'd rather fight and try to survive than simply accept death without resistance. At the same time, Michael was still battling the smaller monsters when he saw Chris in danger. He froze in shock, then screamed in panic when he realized how serious the situation was. He dashed toward Chris in a panic, yelling that what he was seeing couldn't possibly be happening. Tears welled up in his eyes as he watched Chris under attack, painful memories resurfacing as he thought another person was going to die because of him again. Michael started blaming himself, thinking that it was his fault for being too weak to defeat even one monster or save his teacher. He reached out with his hand, consumed with guilt, wondering if everything truly was his fault. Belle tried to stop him from running toward the danger, but Michael yelled at her to let go, insisting that their teacher was still alive. Belle, however, was heartbroken and told him it was already too late, that the teacher had sacrificed himself to protect them, and the monster had only calmed down because it was full. Michael refused to accept that. He kept repeating that it couldn't be true. He grabbed Belle, desperately pleading with her, saying she could use her healing magic to save their teacher. But Belle could only apologize with sorrowful expression, telling him she couldn't, leaving Michael in a state of complete shock. The scene shifted to a memory from the past between Michael and Chris, during a moment when Michael had asked Chris to help him become stronger. Back then, Michael had spoken honestly, admitting that he probably had no right to make such a request, but he truly wanted to become strong. He told Chris he wanted the strength to take responsibility for things on his own. Despite his fear that Chris might laugh at him, he promised he'd do anything to achieve that strength. Chris had responded calmly and confidently, assuring Michael that he would become strong. In that moment, Michael felt a strong connection to Chris, the only person who had ever truly believed in him and told him he could be strong. Meanwhile, Dulce was shouting with determination, encouraging everyone to fight and not just sit around waiting for help. Michael started feeling more resolved and wanted to give his all in the battle. At the same time, Na acted quickly and launched a powerful offensive spell, rallying everyone together. Even with all this, Michael still struggled with guilt, thinking he was only a burden and that it would have been better if he had been the one eaten instead of their teacher. Belle tried to get Michael to calm down and urge him to run away with her, but Michael kept crying and couldn't control his emotions. He wished that it had been him who died instead of the teacher, or even his mother. His tears wouldn't stop, and he covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed with grief. At that critical moment, a strange voice whispered to Michael, telling him that if he truly desired strength, he would have to take its hand and become one with it. Michael began to give in to that voice, believing that he was the one who should have died. But then, something strange happened. Michael suddenly felt something that snapped him out of his despair. At that same moment, everyone heard a loud and powerful voice commanding them to stop at once. Chris suddenly reappeared, standing tall and confident after having defeated the monster. With sarcasm, he asked the students why they were trying to run away when there were still so many monsters left to defeat. A system message appeared in front of Chris, confirming that 27 out of 50 monsters have been defeated, showing that their mission was heading toward major success. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more content. Feel free to leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts or suggestions. If you want to stay updated on our latest uploads, click the notification bell icon. And hey, why not check out some of our other videos popping up on the screen right now? If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It really means a lot. Peace.